הדובר הבא שלנו, הדובר השני, הוא האב גריגורי קולינס. האב קולינס משמש כאב מנזר הבנדיקטינים בכנסיית דורמציון בהר ציון החל משנת 2011. האב קולינס הוא בעל תואר דוקטור בלימודים ביזנטיים מאוניברסיטת קווינס שבבלפאסט, שם הוא גם נולד. הוא לימד שנים רבות תיאולוגיה והיסטוריה של תיאולוגיה באוניברסיטה הבנדיקטינית ברומא. הוא פרסם מספר רב של ספרים ומאמרים, ולאחרונה הוא הוציא לאור את הספר Meeting Christ in His Mysteries, a Benedictine Vision of Spiritual Life. האב קולינס ירצה על מנזר הדורמציון ומסדר הנזירים הבנדיקטינים בראשית המאה ה-20 ועד ימינו. Father Collins, thank you for honoring us. Thank you for inviting. האב קולינס ירצה באנגלית.
First, I must apologize for speaking in English, but I've only been 2.5 years in the country, and I have to speak in German for most of the time because Dormition Abbey is a German-speaking monastery, so I haven't yet had an opportunity to learn much Hebrew. Can you all understand me? Yes? Because I come from Belfast, Northern Ireland, where, as you know, the best English in the world is spoken. What I want to do in this 20 minutes is say something about the Abbey as a community and in the context of our history for the last 100 years or so. I feel a bit of a phony talking about this because, as I say, I've only been here 2.5 years. I didn't belong to Dormition Abbey. You know, in the Benedictine system, we take a vow of stabilitas loci, stability in one place, which means that for your whole life, you enter a monastery and stay there in that monastery. And I entered an Irish monastery and was elected by the German monks here when I was in Ireland. So it's a bit unusual, and I didn't originally belong to this monastery. So what I'm saying is really the result of about 3 years' experience. But I think in Jerusalem, 1 day within your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. 3 years' experience can equal 30 in some other places. First of all, why is there a German monastery sitting on top of Mount Zion? Well, unfortunately, as we would say in the Roman Catholic Church, it was probably conceived in sin because it was a gift from the Kaiser, Wilhelm II. And, you know, it was at the point 1900 when the colonial powers were interested in exploiting the Middle East. They all wanted to make bases there. The Russians were making incursions. The British had founded a Protestant bishopric, also with the house up there in Mount Zion. And the Germans wanted to get in on the act. So they got a piece of land from the Sultan, and they invited the German Benedictine monks of Boiron Abbey, which was the biggest Benedictine abbey in the world at that time, to send some monks to staff the monastery. And the purpose of the monastery's foundation was to provide a place where German-speaking pilgrims could come and have a liturgy and an experience with which they could connect in another land, in another country. And actually, that's still something we do. We receive hundreds and hundreds of German-speaking groups from Germany, Austria and Switzerland every year. We often talk to them in our divan. They come to the liturgy with us because we celebrate our liturgy in German. Some parts in Latin, but mostly in German. So that was the original purpose. The architect of the church was the Cologne diocesan architect. So sometimes people say we're an outpost of Cologne. And he modelled the church on 2 great churches of history, a Byzantine church, Ravenna, San Vitale in Ravenna, which anybody who's done Byzantine studies will know as one of the great churches of the early period, and Aachen, the dome, the cathedral in Aachen. So what you have is a kind of Rhineland building. But he was quite sensitive to being in the Middle East, because if you look at the bell tower, it tries to echo in the architecture something of the minaret behind. And there was an attempt at least to say it's not just a German building, it's in the Middle East. In a way it's kitsch, because it's neo-romantic, neo-Romanesque. But as I always say, nobody does kitsch better than the Germans, because they have the money to do it well. Church was dedicated in 1910, and after that point, everybody expected a normal Benedictine monastery That didn't happen because World War I happened. And as a result of that, the German community were interned by the British. Now, I have to say, I have some experience myself of being interned by the British. My uncle was interned by the British, so I always keep telling the German monks, that's no big deal, we have experience of this too. But they were interned by the British, 1918, and they were actually expelled from the monastery. This is an internal Roman Catholic dispute, you know, and as a result of that, they were out of the monastery for 3 years, but the Pope sent them back. So, life went on. Second World War came. Once again, the monks were interned by the British and taken out of the community. Actually, this time they were interned in the Austrian hospice. I could imagine worse places to be interned than the Austrian hospice, perhaps. Wiener Schnitzel and Apfelstrudel, still very good there. But they were out of their community. They couldn't live there. There were 8 non-German monks, one of whom I'm delighted to say is still alive and is in our community in Galilee, in Tabgha, Pater Hieronymus, who is an Israeli citizen because he came to this country in 1937. He speaks perfect Hebrew and he's very proud to be an Israeli citizen. And he was an officer in the British Army. So he spent the week going to Egypt to fight Rommel and coming back at the weekend to visit his interned German brethren in the Austrian hospice. Dormition is not an ordinary community, but we're not an ordinary city, so why should it be? The community returned after the Second World War, but were again expelled because of the 1948 war. And the roof was blown off the church and so on. And actually the founding abbot, Maurice Kaufmann, died outside the monastery. He died over there at St. Charles Hospice. And as a result of that, the monks were disorientated outside the monastery. So the Vatican sent a very remarkable German called Leo von Rudloff. And Leo von Rudloff became the abbot of Dormition Abbey, and von Rudloff was the one who opened Dormition Abbey to Judaism. Because before that, naturally, it had been part of the Latin Patriarchate. We're still part of the Latin Patriarchate. It had been much more focused on what the Germans call the Einheimische Christen, the native Arab Christians of the land. And it was von Rudloff, coming from post-war Germany, who said, this is not right, this one-dimensionality is not right. We must open this community also to an understanding of our Jewish context. We're in Israel. We're in the Holy Land. We're in the new state of Israel. Von Rudloff learned Hebrew, made many connections with many wonderful people. Yitzchak's father, for example, was a personal friend of von Rudloff, and he contributed to the Second Vatican Council, Nostra Aetate, the document in which we began to accept for the first time the horrors of what we had inflicted on other people. That council called by John the 23rd, who, thank God, was canonized and declared a saint last weekend. That was a canonization also of the New Direction since the 1960s. Von Rudloff brought the community back, restored the community. There's a wonderful story of the German monks, the old German monks, bringing up the food before any paths were built there, and a group of Orthodox Jewish youth coming along, taking the food off all the old German monks and carrying it on their backs up to the monastery, giving it back to them. The relations were good, I think, at various points in the past. The community were again out of the monastery in 1967, because at that point it was unfortunately in the buffer zone between the two warring groups, and the roof was blown off again. Yeah, we have had a checkered history of the roof in particular, has had a checkered history. They returned, and the period after 67 was a time of weakness, really. There weren't many people joining. It didn't get much energy into it in the 1970s or 80s. However, something very important was founded, 40 years of which we celebrate this year. That is our German Study Year program. And funded by the German government, 24 young German theological students of the highest level come from the German universities, and they live in a Studentenwohnheim, in a student residence on the other side of the hill, in our property, in our other garden. And they get 2 semesters here in this country. They learn some Hebrew, they learn some Arabic, they study Judentum, Jewish studies, they study biblical archaeology, they study the history of the land, and they have connections with a wide variety of people. Hebrew Union, Hebrew University, and they go back to the German church with their horizons truly widened. They have contributed the alumni and alumnae of this program have contributed to the opening of the eyes and minds of German academia to the importance of Israel, to the importance of this place. This year we celebrate 40 years. I fly in June to Bonn. I fly to Bonn tonight also to interview the new students for next year. But we celebrate the 40th anniversary with many representatives from academia, from church, from the different faith groups in Bonn in June. That remains one of the major works of the community. It's one of the things we do most. We have a monk who's a chaplain to the students. 3 of us teach. I teach Byzantine mysticism. Pretty obscure, yeah, but I teach Byzantine mysticism. We have a Coptologist, an American monk who teaches Coptic studies. And we have a German monk who just got his PhD in Eastern Christian studies, and he teaches that. Many, many different professors coming from all over who teach things there. What do we do in the monastery? What one does in every Benedictine monastery. We go regularly throughout the day to the church and we chant the Psalms in Gregorian chant in German. We begin at 6 o'clock in the morning with Vigil, Vigil and Laudes, lauds, the morning praises. We return at noon. We celebrate the Mass in the morning. We return in the evening for Vespers. We return at night for Complete, Compline, the last office of the day. And that structures the day. That's how a Benedictine monk lives his day. We eat together in silence. We read a book. One monk is appointed for the week to read the book. The books we read are generally not religious. You can get too much religion, even in a Benedictine monastery. It's wise at times to have a pause of some kind. What we're reading at the moment is a life of Goethe, the poet Goethe in the refectory. And in the evening we're reading a book about the land at the time of Jesus, which is a very objective academic study of this area in the 1st century, as we call it, AD. And we live together. Yeah? We have periods of silence for prayer. The function of Benedictine life is to provide a kind of trellis where exotic plants can grow. Most people who join Benedictine monasteries are fairly exotic plants. And really, to come here, you have to be a fairly exotic plant. Because some of us didn't even enter monastic life here. We came here for other reasons. I was elected abbot, so I came from Ireland. The purpose of the structure is to help us focus on the presence of God, to stay connected to God, and in that way to open our horizons to the mystery of the divine. And this community is one which has a profound interest in the interreligious dimensions of dialogue. We are not interested in sectarianism. We are not interested in making statements about Christianity, and we under no circumstances engage in any form of proselytism. I took a cheroot. When I get a day off, which is about once a month, I love Tel Aviv. I think Tel Aviv is a vibrant city on the sea. I love it. If you're Irish, you have to see the sea. So I go down to Tel Aviv on the cheroot, if I can do it once a month, to see the sea. And I was sitting on the cheroot beside a lady from Jerusalem, and I was in civvies, in shorts. She asked me, "What do you do?" And I told her. And there was a frozen silence. Yeah? And then I said to her, "You're wondering, aren't you? Do we run missions to Jews?" And she said, "Yes, I am wondering that." And I said, "Well, no, we don't. And we absolutely deplore it." So our community is very committed to the post-Vatican II Roman Catholic rethinking of where our history went wrong. We're a community that wants to be open to every group that comes to us. Benedictine monasteries are famous for hospitality. We have various guest facilities. I would rejoice, actually, if Yiska and various people here could organise a trip to us, to come and meet some of us, to talk to us, to get a tour of the buildings. The monastery is a very beautiful building. You'll all be most welcome. Yeah. Our situation at the moment is we have 24 monks. Unusually, in the German-speaking world, we have young monks. We're a very young community. I mean, I'm 53, but in monastic terms, that's pretty young. Pater Hieronymus is 94, the one who's the Israeli citizen. But we do have younger monks. We have 3 new people who've come since Christmas. Yeah? And it's a community which is vibrant and which has got a lot of energy and a lot of vision. We have a second monastery near Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, Tabgha. And at the moment we have 7 monks, relatively young as well, plus Pater Hieronymus, the old man, up there. And Galilee is obviously a very different atmosphere. I have to say I love Jerusalem. I wouldn't have accepted this position if I didn't love the place. But it can be claustrophobic. Yeah, we're wedged between a yeshiva, an Armenian cemetery, David's tomb, and a Greek cemetery. And I came from a monastery in Ireland with 250 acres of land. So it can sometimes feel a little gehemmt, as the Germans say, begrenzt. Therefore, to go to Galilee and to look across at the Golan and to see that wonderful sea and the rolling hills, that's a kind of therapy. Because I'm abbot of Galilee as well, so I have to go up there too. How do we see the future developing? More and more of our young monks are interested in learning Hebrew. Our Father Daniel from Poland has taken 2 ulpans, has learned a considerable amount of Hebrew, and is able to talk to Jewish groups who come and explain something about what we do and about the monastery and its history and so on. So I would hope that in the future there will be more inculturation in the actual region. This is something one needs when one lives here. That's nearly 20 minutes. Actually, summarising such a complex creature as Dormition Abbey in 20 minutes is not so easy. But I'd be very happy to take any form of question if anyone has, if there's time for a question or two. Sure. Anything that you if I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer.
What is your relationship with the Orthodox Institute, which is located on Mount Zion, Yeshivat Futzot?
Complex. Our next door neighbours. Rather complex. I've only been here 2.5 years, yeah. When I was here, I came to teach in our study year as a guest lecturer. This is how they elected me later. But when I was there, I was told at that point that the relationship was not good. Rubbish was dumped over the wall, for example. I saw that with my own eyes as a guest, yeah. In the interim period, before I came in 2011, I was told, they contacted me by email and so on, and they said it had improved. Things were better. But it is my impression since I've come that it is not actually so good at times. We were invited to Hanukkah by the man who runs it. He was there with 1 or 2 other people, but there were no students present. Whereas all our students came. And I was a little surprised that none of our students were present. Also, I have to say that I'm a little careful about being instrumentalized to make it look like everything on the mountain is rosy. Because it isn't. Yeah? Let me give you a couple of examples. It's now normal. If I stand outside the monastery, which I sometimes have to do to meet a guest, you know, dressed like this, at least one person will spit. This is now normal. One of our monks was manhandled and pulled to the ground about 1.5 years ago. It's very common that we have aggressive things said, either in Hebrew or in American English, sometimes, yeah. So there is a general atmosphere of uncomfortableness at times. I'm not comfortable walking around dressed up like this, but I do it because Israel is a secular democracy. And I keep telling people back in Ireland, this is the only functioning secular democracy in the Middle East that I'm aware of. Really functioning secular democracy. And in a secular democracy, there are certain rights one has. To be able to walk on the street without being harassed, for example. But harassment can be a feature of life. Actually, I had a little vignette for you as I came across here this evening, not on Mount Zion, but just down from King David Hotel. I met a young Israeli man selling flags who spat violently on the ground. 3 minutes later, as I crossed the road, I met a young Israeli man who came up to me and made a joke with me, shook my hand and said, "You must be very hot wearing this." I mean, both sides are reality, yeah? And I don't want to give the impression, you know, that we're living in a state of siege in Mount Zion. We're not. We have many, many good friends. We have many positive contacts with people. But there is a growing sense of harassment among us. There was a newspaper article last week which said that our students who are theological students funded by the German government at the highest level, are organising orgies and drinking parties with Arabs from East Jerusalem. I mean, this is not journalism, this is nonsense. Yeah? Let me tell you, tonight, as the abbot of that monastery and the dean of the study here, pure nonsense. Totally untrue. So it's a complex relationship. Also, with the people who come to David's tomb, it's very loud and very noisy. Saturday nights, it's normal for us now to have extremely loud music until 12:15, 12:30. I know people celebrate. I've nothing against people celebrating. But sometimes it creates the impression of a certain aggressivity. Let's be honest. Yeah? Let me just be clear about one thing. We had a price tag, the Germans call it price tag Anschlag, a price tag attack last summer. We had graffiti all over the wall of the monastery and the side. We had the car tires sliced open. Later on, this Protestant cemetery was vandalised. It was said in some newspapers that we were claiming that the people who go to David's tomb did this. We never claimed such a thing. I have no idea who did that. I hope the police have some idea who did it. I don't believe the people who go to the party in David's tomb on Saturday night are doing that. One has to differentiate between groups with whom one has a relationship, yeah? But there is a growing sense for us living there of a certain hostility around us, which is unfortunate, I think, because another newspaper article a few weeks ago said that there was an anti-Semitic German priest, no name, naturally, in our community. I cannot think of any community less likely to be anti-Semitic than that one. And believe me, I'm not a German, so I can say that. Educated German young people face their history. They know what their history is. And they know perfectly well what they have to understand. So there are no anti-Semitic German priests in our community. There is nothing in this community but an openness to we all choose to live in Israel. We all like to live here. Let me also say we have many, many, many friends, supporters, people who encourage us. Yeah, reality is complex. Listen, I grew up in Belfast. You couldn't imagine a better preparation for living here than growing up in Belfast. That's the truth. Except in some ways, some of our people were even more fanatical than some of the people I've met here, yeah?
Maybe another question?
Yes, okay, please.
Again, Bakasha.
Just
Yeah,
a short
hello.
remark. If St. Benedict wanted to be called in Hebrew, he would be called HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Yeah, very nice, yeah. Blessed, the blessed one.
עוד שאלה?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.